The clock above the warehouse door ticked toward midnight. Its second hand, dragging like it too, was exhausted. Daniel Hayes wiped the sweat from his forehead, shoulders aching from hours of lifting crates. His back throbbed, his palms burned, but quitting wasn't an option. Not when rent was due. Not when Christmas morning meant his daughter Grace would be peeking under their second-hand tree. Waiting for magic he could barely afford. Outside, the city sparkled with festive lights. Couples hurried by with shopping bags. Carolers sang on corners and windows glowed with warmth. Daniel walked alone, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, the weight of bills and overdue notices pressing heavier than the snow beneath his boots. He thought of Grace. Only 8. Her handwritten wish list folded neatly in her stocking. A doll, a warm coat for school, and maybe something for Daddy too. He'd smiled when he read it, but it stung all the same. She asked for so little, because she knew how hard he tried. Daniel cut through the back alley to save time, the shortcut he always took from the warehouse. The air was sharp, the snow crunching underfoot. Dumpsters lined the brick walls, their shadows long under the dim flicker of a streetlight. He adjusted his scarf and quickened his pace. That's when he heard it, the rustle of plastic. A faint scraping sound, not a rat, something else. Daniel froze, heart thudding. His eyes narrowed toward the source. There, by the largest dumpster, a small figure hunched low, rummaging through black trash bags. Tiny hands tore at the plastic, desperate, frantic. He took a cautious step closer, the crunch of his boot echoing. The figure stiffened, then turned. It was a girl, no older than 7. Her face was pale, cheeks hollow, lips cracked from the cold. Her hair hung in tangled strands, and her coat, if it could be called that, was torn at the sleeve. In her trembling hands, she clutched a half-eaten sandwich pulled from the garbage. Her eyes met his, wide, hollow, terrified. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. For a moment the world went silent. The city lights, the carols, even the wind seemed to fade. All he could see was this fragile child, surviving off trash while his own daughter waited at home for him. The girl froze, sandwich halfway to her lips, staring at him as though caught in a crime. She didn't speak. She didn't run. She just stared. Daniel's instinct screamed to move, to say something, to reach out. But before he could, the girl's hands tightened around the sandwich, as if it were her last lifeline. The flickering streetlight buzzed overhead, casting shadows across her face, and in that moment, Daniel realized Christmas Eve had just changed. Daniel lifted his hands slowly, palms out like approaching a wounded animal. "Hey," he said softly, his voice gentler than the crunch of snow beneath his boots. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." The girl froze, clutching the half-eaten sandwich tighter. Her eyes darted toward the alley's exit, her body trembling. Daniel stopped a few feet away, lowering himself into a crouch so he wasn't towering over her. "You must be freezing," he murmured, unzipping his jacket. He slipped it off and extended it toward her. The wind whipped cold air across his shoulders, but he didn't flinch. "Here, take it, please." The girl hesitated. Her lips were tinged blue, her tiny frame shaking with each breath. Finally, she snatched the jacket and wrapped it around herself, though she still eyed him with suspicion. "That's better," Daniel said, forcing a small smile. "What's your name?" Her voice was so faint he almost didn't catch it. "Maya." The single word hit him harder than he expected. A name made her real, not just a shadow in the alley. He nodded slowly. "Maya, that's a beautiful name." She stared down at the sandwich, nibbling the crust. Every movement was defensive, desperate. Daniel's heart ached. Grace was the same age. He pictured his daughter's warm pajamas, her bed covered with stuffed animals. The contrast was unbearable. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said gently. "It's too cold. Do you have somewhere safe to go?" Her eyes flashed wide and she shook her head violently. When Daniel suggested softly, "I could take you somewhere warm," panic surged across her face. "No." Maya gasped, scrambling back. The sandwich slipped from her hand, landing in the snow. She clutched the jacket tight as if it were armor. Daniel raised his hands again. Okay. I won't push you." But before he could calm her further, Maya bolted. Bare feet slapped against the icy pavement, her small frame darting toward the far end of the alley. "Wait!" Daniel called, rising to chase after her. He stopped short, torn in 2 directions. Grace was waiting at home. She was counting on him to come back. But Maya was disappearing into the night, swallowed by shadows. His chest heaved. He couldn't abandon Grace, but he couldn't abandon this child either. Not now. Just as Maya turned the corner, Daniel caught a glimpse of her wrist, where the sleeve of his jacket slid up, dark bruises, finger-shaped, old and new, layered like scars of repeated harm. Daniel's breath caught, his gut twisting. That wasn't from the cold. That wasn't from hunger. That was from someone's hand. And then she was gone, vanishing into the frozen night. Daniel stood alone in the alley, snow drifting quietly around him, his fists clenched at his sides, his heart pounding with the weight of a terrible choice. One thing was certain. He couldn't pretend he hadn't seen her. The apartment was warm, but Daniel couldn't shake the chill from the alley. Snow still clung to his boots as he stepped inside, the quiet hum of the heater greeting him. Grace ran from the living room, her pigtails bouncing, wearing the flannel pajamas she loved. "Daddy, you're home," she squealed, throwing her arms around his legs. Daniel forced a smile, kneeling to hug her back. "Of course, baby girl. You think I'd miss Christmas Eve?" Grace grinned, tugging him toward the small corner where their second-hand tree stood, strung with hand-cut paper ornaments and blinking lights that flickered unevenly. Above the mantel, her homemade stocking hung proudly, stitched with uneven letters spelling Grace. "Santa's coming tonight," she whispered, eyes wide with wonder. "Do you think he'll like the cookies I made?" Daniel smoothed her hair, his chest tight. "He'll love them." "How could he not?" He helped her brush her teeth and tucked her into bed. She clutched her stuffed rabbit, its ears worn thin. Daniel pulled the blanket up to her chin, leaning down to kiss her forehead. But even as she whispered, "Good night, Daddy," his mind wasn't in the room. It was back in the alley, back with a little girl in rags, bruises on her wrist, clutching garbage like treasure. He sat at the edge of the bed, staring at Grace's innocent face. What if that were her? Alone, cold, scared. The thought hollowed him out. He shook his head, pushing the image away, but it returned like a ghost. Who was Maya? Where were her parents? Why would anyone let a child roam the streets on Christmas Eve? Daniel stood pacing quietly through the small apartment. Bills sat stacked on the kitchen counter, unopened. He had enough to worry about. Grace depended on him. One wrong move and their fragile stability could shatter. But the image of Maya's eyes haunted him, hollow, desperate. He poured himself a glass of water, hands trembling slightly. "You can't save every kid in the world," he told himself. "You barely manage with one." Just then, he heard Grace's small voice. "Daddy?" He turned, heart thudding, to see her sitting up in bed, holding a folded piece of paper. She rubbed her eyes and handed it to him. "It's my Christmas wish," she whispered. Daniel unfolded it. In her uneven handwriting, with drawings along the edges, it read, "Dear Santa, please give my daddy something nice, and please help another child too. They need it more than me." Daniel's throat tightened. He pressed the paper to his chest, staring at his daughter, who had already curled back under the covers, drifting off to sleep. Tears stung his eyes. Grace had no idea about the girl in the alley, but somehow she knew exactly what was at stake. Daniel sank into the chair by her bed, torn between protecting the little girl he already had and the one he couldn't forget. The next evening, Christmas lights twinkled in the windows of warm homes, but Daniel wasn't home. Grace was with a neighbor, safe and cozy. Daniel walked back toward the alley, his breath visible in the icy air. A worn backpack slung over his shoulder. Beside him padded Max, his loyal German shepherd, fur dusted with snow. Inside the bag, 2 blankets, bottled water, and sandwiches wrapped in foil. He had no idea if Maya would show herself, but he couldn't shake her hollow eyes. He couldn't live with himself if he didn't try. The alley was just as dark as before, shadows stretching under the flickering streetlight. Max sniffed the air, ears pricked, tail still. Hours crawled by. Daniel paced, checked corners, whispered her name into the night. Nothing. Finally, as midnight crept closer, Max gave a low whine, pulling toward the far dumpster. Daniel followed, crouching down. There she was. Maya sat curled into a ball, her thin frame shaking, Daniel's jacket still wrapped around her like a cocoon. Her face peeked out, wary, eyes darting to Max. "Hey," Daniel said softly, lowering his voice. "It's me. Remember?" Maya shrank back, clutching her knees. Max sat obediently, wagging his tail just enough to soften the tension. Daniel pulled a sandwich from his bag, unwrapped the foil slowly. The scent of ham and cheese filled the cold air. He set it on the ground and slid it gently toward her. Maya hesitated, then snatched it with lightning speed, devouring it in ragged bites. Daniel kept his distance, speaking gently. "I brought blankets. If you get too cold, you can use one." Her eyes lifted, still suspicious, but softer than before. Between bites, she whispered something almost lost in the wind. "Not going back," Daniel frowned. "Back where?" Maya shook her head violently, chewing faster, fear flashing across her face. "Bad people." The words landed heavy. Daniel leaned closer, keeping his tone calm. "Maya, who are the bad people?" Her lips pressed tight, sandwich crumbs falling to her lap. She wouldn't say more, but the way her hands trembled told Daniel this wasn't just a runaway child. Someone had hurt her, or worse, was still looking for her. The thought twisted his gut. Grace was safe at home, but Maya was someone's daughter too. Someone who had bruises on her wrist, who scavenged garbage for food, who whispered about bad people as if they were monsters. Before he could ask again, Max growled low. Daniel's head snapped up. At the end of the alley, twin beams of headlights cut through the snow. A vehicle crawled forward, tires crunching on ice. The light swept across the brick walls, then toward the dumpster. Maya froze. Her sandwich slipped from her hands as she dove deeper into the shadows, eyes wide with terror. "Please," she hissed, her voice breaking for the first time. "Don't let them take me." Daniel's blood ran cold. Whoever was behind that wheel wasn't random. This wasn't chance. This was a hunt. The SUV's engine growled low, headlights crawling across the alley walls like searchlights. Daniel instinctively stepped in front of Maya, spreading his arms just enough to shield her. Max pressed against his leg, hackles raised, a low rumble vibrating from his throat. Maya's whisper sliced the icy air. "They're looking for me." Her voice trembled, eyes locked on the dark windows of the vehicle as if monsters lurked inside. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. Whoever they weren't Christmas shoppers taking a wrong turn. The SUV slowed, pausing long enough to make his stomach twist. Then after a moment that stretched like eternity, it rolled on, disappearing around the corner. Daniel exhaled hard, the steam of his breath clouding the freezing night. He knelt, gripping Maya's shoulders gently. "We can't stay out here. You'll freeze. You'll starve. You need somewhere safe." Maya shook her head, clutching his jacket tighter. "Safe doesn't exist." The words broke something inside him. He thought of Grace sleeping in her warm bed, her handmade stocking hanging above their tiny tree. And then he looked at Maya, dirty, trembling, staring into the darkness as if safety was a lie. Daniel made the choice before he could second-guess it. "Come with me." Maya blinked, stunned. No buts," he said firmly. "Just for tonight. No one will hurt you." She hesitated, then gave the faintest nod. Minutes later, Daniel unlocked his apartment door, motioning her inside quickly before the hallway light exposed too much. Max padded in behind them, glancing back once as if to check no one had followed. The apartment was small but warm, the faint smell of cookies lingering from Grace's baking earlier. Daniel gestured toward the spare room, really just a storage nook with an old twin bed and a quilt. Maya stepped in cautiously, eyes darting to every corner as though expecting danger to leap out. Just as Daniel began to settle her in, a door creaked. Grace shuffled down the hallway, rubbing her eyes, her stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand. She froze when she saw Maya. "Daddy." "Who's that?" Daniel's heart clenched. How could he explain? "This is Maya," he said softly. She's staying with us tonight." Grace's face lit up with sleepy wonder. "Hi, Maya. Do you want to see our tree?" Without waiting for an answer, she grabbed Maya's hand and pulled her toward the living room. Daniel followed, nerves taut. The girls stopped before the small Christmas tree, its colored lights flickering unevenly. Grace grinned proudly, pointing at her handmade star on top. Maya stood frozen, her lips parted, eyes shimmering in the glow of red, green, and gold. Awe softened her face. She whispered so faintly Daniel almost didn't hear. "I've never had one." The words hit like a blade. Daniel swallowed hard, his chest aching. He watched Maya staring at the tree, not as decoration, but as a miracle. And he realized for her it was. The apartment was quiet. Grace had drifted back to sleep, her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her chin, the glow of the Christmas lights washing her room in soft colors. In the spare room, Maya sat cross-legged on the bed, Daniel's jacket still wrapped around her like armor. Daniel set a plate of cookies and a glass of milk on the nightstand. "Eat," he said gently. "You need it." Maya nibbled at one cookie, eyes fixed on her lap. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to crowd her. "Maya, those men in the car. Why were you so afraid of them?" Her fingers twisted the hem of the blanket, silent at first. Then she whispered, "Because they belong to them," Daniel frowned. "Them?" Her eyes darted up, wide, haunted. "The bad men." A chill crept down Daniel's spine. He kept his voice steady. "Who are the bad men, Maya?" Her lips trembled. "The ones Mommy worked for." Daniel's breath hitched. "Your mother." Maya nodded slowly. "She worked at the big building with glass windows. She was always busy, but then she told me not to be scared if she didn't come home." Tears welled in her eyes. "One night she left, and she never came back." Daniel swallowed, the weight of her words pressing on him. His mind reeled. This wasn't just a lost child. This was something else, something tied to power, to money, to danger. "What happened after?" he asked softly. "They took me." Maya's small voice cracked. "They said they'd take care of me because Mommy couldn't. But they yelled. They locked me in rooms. I ran away. They're still looking." Daniel clenched his fists, fury bubbling beneath his calm exterior. A little girl handed over like property. No wonder she scavenged alleys. No wonder she trembled at headlights. Maya reached under the mattress, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper. She held it out with trembling fingers. "Mommy left this. He kept it." Daniel unfolded it carefully. The paper was smudged, creased from being hidden too long. Faded ink spelled out hurried words. "If anything happens to me, protect Maya. They'll try to silence the truth." At the bottom corner, stamped like a signature of power, was a corporate logo. Daniel's blood ran cold. He knew that symbol. He scrubbed it from office glass panels every night. He whispered it aloud, almost in disbelief. "Argonne Industries." Maya's eyes flicked up at him. "You know them?" Daniel stared at the letter, the weight of realization crashing down. He had been cleaning their offices for years, never knowing a child's life, and maybe her mother's death, was tangled in the same halls. The quiet hum of the heater filled the silence, but Daniel's heartbeat roared in his ears. If Argonne's name was on this, Maya wasn't just a runaway. She was a target, and Daniel had just brought her into his home. The skyscraper loomed over the city like a monolith of glass and steel, its polished surface reflecting Christmas lights from the streets below. Daniel swiped his badge, pushing through the service entrance, mop bucket rolling behind him. To anyone watching, he was invisible, just another janitor working the night shift. But tonight, he wasn't cleaning. He was searching. Maya's crumpled letter still burned in his pocket, the Argonne Industries logo etched in his mind. Her words echoed, "They'll try to silence the truth." Daniel wheeled his cart down the corridor, ears tuned. Most floors were empty for the holiday, but faint voices drifted from the executive wing. He slowed, crouching behind a glass wall, sponge in hand as cover. Two men in suits stood near the conference room, whispering urgently. "The girl's still out there," one muttered. "If anyone connects her to Helen's files, we're finished." "Relax," the other replied sharply. "The SUV team is sweeping the city. She won't survive long. We just need to close loose ends." Daniel's chest tightened, his fists clenched around the mop handle. They weren't searching for Maya to help her. They were hunting her, to erase her, just like her mother. The word struck him like a hammer. Close loose ends. He forced himself to keep his head down, scrubbing the floor tiles as though he hadn't heard. But his ears burned with every syllable, his heart pounding louder than their voices. The men moved on, leaving silence in their wake. Daniel exhaled shakily, rage simmering under his skin. Images collided in his mind. Maya shivering in his jacket, Grace fast asleep under their flickering Christmas tree lights. Both girls, fragile in different ways depending on him. He leaned against the mop, staring out the window at the glowing city below. For years he had convinced himself his only duty was to Grace, to keep her fed, clothed, safe. But now he knew. If he turned his back, Maya would vanish, another child lost to the cruelty of men in power. He couldn't let that happen. Not while he was still breathing. That night, back at home, Daniel paused at Grace's bedroom door. She lay curled beneath her quilt, rabbit tucked under her chin, her lips parted in peaceful sleep. He watched her chest rise and fall, steady, unbothered by the storm outside their lives. "I won't let her become another you," he whispered into the dark. His throat tightened. "Not while I'm here." A floorboard creaked behind him. Daniel turned and froze. His supervisor, Mr. Keller, stood in the hallway of the corporate building, eyes narrowed. Somehow, Daniel hadn't heard him approach earlier when he was eavesdropping. "You've got a good job here, Hayes," Keller said, voice low and dangerous. "Don't throw it away, sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Daniel swallowed hard, masking the fury building inside him. He nodded slowly, but in his chest the vow solidified like steel. He wasn't backing down. Daniel's gut had told him Keller wouldn't stay quiet. The warning in his supervisor's voice lingered in his ears all the way home. Still, he clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, it had been only a threat. That hope died 2 nights later. A knock rattled the apartment door, sharp and deliberate. Max barked instantly, his growl echoing through the small space. Daniel stiffened, setting down his coffee mug. Grace peeked out of her room, rubbing her eyes. "Stay inside, sweetheart," he said quickly, voice tight. When he opened the door, 2 men stood in the dimly lit hallway. Their suits were crisp, their smiles too polished to be genuine. One carried a clipboard, the other a sleek black briefcase. "Mr. Hayes?" the taller one asked smoothly. "We're with the Winter Children's Fund. Doing rounds tonight, making sure every child in this building is accounted for and safe during the holidays." Daniel's stomach sank. He'd cleaned enough boardrooms to recognize the corporate shine. These weren't charity workers. They were suits, Argon's men. He forced a polite nod. "Appreciate what you're doing. But my daughter's already in bed." "Long day." The man with the clipboard leaned, peering past Daniel's shoulder. "We heard reports about a stray child in this neighborhood. Frightened, alone." "We're very concerned," Max barked again, louder, teeth flashing. Daniel stepped into the doorway, blocking their view. His palms dampened with sweat. "Haven't seen anyone. Just me and Grace here." The shorter man's smile tightened. "If you do, you'll let us know. For her own good, of course." Daniel met his gaze, holding it steady, hiding the thunder in his chest. "Of course." They lingered a moment longer, as if testing his resolve, then turned and walked down the hall. Their footsteps echoed until the stairwell door shut. Daniel locked every bolt and leaned against the door, exhaling raggedly. His pulse hammered in his throat. Behind him, a small voice trembled. "Daddy." "Who were they?" He spun. Grace stood barefoot, her rabbit dangling from her hand, eyes wide with fear. "Just some men," Daniel said softly, crouching to her level. "Looking for someone." Grace bit her lip. "Are they looking for Maya?" Daniel froze. The sound of her name in Grace's mouth made the danger feel suddenly closer, sharper. He placed a finger to his lips. "Shh, you can't tell anyone she's here." "Promise me." Grace nodded quickly, her eyes glassy. In the spare room, Maya had heard everything. She sat curled on the bed, knees tucked to her chest. When Daniel walked in, she looked up at him, her small face pale but determined. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked gently. "For lying," Maya said. Her voice broke, but she forced the word out anyway. "For protecting me, Dad." The single word cut through Daniel like a blade and a balm at the same time. He swallowed hard, throat tight, unsure how to respond. But outside, somewhere in the shadows of the city, Argon's men were closing in. Daniel's hands shook as he stuffed blankets and a few cans of food into his worn backpack. Max whined at his side, sensing the urgency. Grace clutched her rabbit, confused but obedient, while Maya sat on the edge of the bed, pale and silent. "We have to go," Daniel said firmly, trying to keep the fear out of his voice. "Now." "Daddy, why?" Grace whispered. He knelt, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Because it's not safe here anymore. You trust me, right?" She nodded, though her eyes brimmed with questions. Minutes later, the 4 of them slipped into the frozen night, Max leading with his nose to the ground. The streets were quiet, snow muffling their hurried footsteps. Behind them, Daniel imagined every shadow was an SUV, every flicker of light a threat. His instincts guided him toward the only place he thought they might be overlooked, a church on the edge of town. Its tall spire pierced the snowy sky, the faint sound of Christmas hymns drifting through stained glass. Inside, the warmth was immediate. Candles flickered along the altar, and the choir's voices echoed in the rafters. Daniel led them quietly to a side door, down creaking wooden stairs into the basement. The stone walls were cold, but the space was empty. He spread out the blankets, motioning for the girls to sit. Max curled near them, his steady presence grounding the fear in the room. Moments later, a soft voice spoke behind him. "Can I help you?" Daniel turned, startled, to see Father Michael, the priest of the parish, holding a candle. His eyes softened at the sight of the shivering children. "We just need a place to stay," Daniel whispered. "Just for tonight." The priest studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You're safe here." Later, as the children dozed under the blankets, Daniel sat across from Father Michael at an old wooden table. His voice was low, raw. "There are people after her, the little one, Maya. Her mother worked for Argonne Industries. She disappeared. Now they want to make sure Maya never talks." Father Michael's expression darkened. "Then this isn't just a lost child." Daniel's fists clenched. "I can't go to the police. Argonne's too powerful. They'll bury it." The priest leaned closer, candlelight flickering across his weathered face. "Then go to someone they can't silence. A journalist. Get the truth out before they take her." Daniel sat back, the weight of the words pressing on him. A journalist. It was dangerous, but it might be the only way to protect Maya. He glanced at the girls huddled together, Grace's arm draped over Maya like they'd known each other forever. His heart ached with a mix of fear and resolve. Before he could answer, Max growled, low and deep. A sudden flood of white light pierced through the basement windows. Headlights. Daniel's stomach dropped. The SUV had found them. Snow whipped against Daniel's face as he sprinted down the empty street. Grace clutched to his side, Maya holding his other hand, Max barking furiously at their heels. Behind them, the growl of the SUV's engine echoed, tires skidding across icy pavement. The chase was no longer in the shadows. It was out in the open. They ducked through narrow alleys, Daniel's lungs burning, heart hammering. His only thought, keep them moving, keep them alive. He spotted the glow of a cafe sign ahead. Inside, through frosted glass, sat the only person who might believe him, Karen Blake, an investigative journalist he'd once overheard chasing Argonne stories. She looked up in shock as Daniel burst through the door, dragging the girls inside. "Please," Daniel gasped, shoving the crumpled letter into her hands. "Read this. It's about Maya's mom." Karen scanned the note, her eyes widening. She flipped open her laptop, fingers flying across the keys. Within minutes, she pulled up files, documents she'd been chasing for months but could never pin down. "Your instincts were right," she said, voice tight. Her mother was a whistleblower. She uncovered evidence of Argonne funneling toxic waste into low-income neighborhoods. They silenced her. Officially, it was a car accident. But this, she held up the letter, this proves she knew her life was in danger. And now Maya is the loose end. Daniel's stomach twisted. He glanced at Grace, curled up beside Maya, both girls trembling but clutching each other like sisters. He had pulled them into the crosshairs of something monstrous. Karen lowered her voice. "You need to get out. Argonne has people everywhere. If you stay here, they'll find you." The cafe lights flickered. Max growled, ears pricking. Daniel's blood ran cold. Through the window, he saw them. Men in dark coats scanning the streets, radios pressed to their mouths. "Too late," Daniel muttered. He grabbed the girls, motioning for Karen to pack up her laptop. "We move now." They bolted out the back door, racing into the subway entrance. The air grew damp and heavy as they descended, footsteps echoing off the tile walls. Grace clung to his jacket. Maya's breaths came in short bursts of panic. Karen struggled to keep pace, clutching her bag tight. "I'll publish this," she hissed between breaths. "If I can get it out, everyone will know the truth." They won't be able to touch her, but Daniel wasn't so sure. Truth didn't always protect the innocent. The tunnels twisted, empty but for the distant hum of a train. Daniel pulled the girls down a side passage, chest heaving, sweat mixing with the cold air. That's when he saw them. A line of figures ahead, shadows cutting across the tunnel, blocking the way. Behind them, more footsteps thundered down the stairs. They were surrounded. Daniel shoved the girls behind him, Max bristling at his side, his growl echoing in the hollow space. The lead man stepped forward, voice calm but sharp. "End of the line, Hayes, hand over the girl." Daniel's fists clenched. The fight wasn't over, but escape was closing fast. The tunnel felt like a trap, walls pressing in as the men advanced. Their polished shoes clicked against the tile, voices calm, assured. Predators closing on prey. Daniel shoved Grace and Maya behind him, Max's growl rolling low and steady. His pulse thundered, but his decision had already been made. No more running. The lead man smirked, hand brushing the gun at his hip. "One chance, Hayes, step aside." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Not happening." The man raised a brow. "You're just a janitor." Daniel gripped the metal mop handle strapped to his pack and yanked it free, its end jagged from years of use. "Then you're about to get beat by one." The first lunge came quick, a blur of black coat and swinging fists. Daniel sidestepped, driving the handle into the man's ribs. He crumpled with a grunt. Another rushed forward. Max leapt, teeth flashing, sending him sprawling with a scream. Chaos erupted in the tunnel. Shouts, the clang of bodies against metal rails, the girls' cries echoing. Daniel swung and shoved, every strike fueled by years of exhaustion, anger, and the burning promise that no one would touch his daughter, or Maya, but for every man who fell, more pressed in. Daniel's arms shook, breath ragged. His knees buckled as one caught him across the jaw. He staggered, vision blurring, but stayed on his feet. "Daddy!" Grace cried, her voice piercing through the din. That single word snapped him back. He roared, driving forward, holding the line even as they surrounded him. Then, sirens. The tunnel filled with flashing red and blue lights. The squeal of tires above, the pounding of boots down the stairs. Reporters' cameras flared, their shouts mingling with the barked orders of arriving officers. Police. "Drop your weapons!" The men hesitated, caught between fight and flight. Daniel stood heaving, mop handle raised, Max bristling at his side. And then, in the sudden hush, Maya stepped forward. Her small hands shook. Her lips trembled, but her voice, though fragile, cut through the chaos. "They hurt my mommy." The words echoed, sharp and undeniable. Reporters froze, cameras trained on her. The officers' faces hardened. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the truth broke open in real time. Maya's chest heaved, but she stood tall, eyes wide. Her child's voice dismantling the carefully woven lies of men in suits. The lead man tried to sneer, but the floodlights made him look less powerful, more desperate. Reporters swarmed, microphones shoved forward, questions shouted. Police pushed him back, his denials drowned out by the storm. Daniel dropped to his knees beside Maya, steadying her trembling shoulders. "You did it," he whispered, voice cracking. "You told them." She clutched his hand, eyes shimmering. "I wasn't alone." And with that, the fragile spell of silence was broken forever. Snow still lined the city streets weeks after that harrowing night in the subway. But the storm that had nearly destroyed everything was finally behind them. Headlines screamed Argonne's downfall. Executives were paraded in handcuffs across the evening news, their crimes laid bare. Whistleblowers came forward, voices trembling but firm, emboldened by one small girl who had whispered the truth the world couldn't ignore. For Daniel, the aftermath was quieter, but no less life-changing. Child Services had sat across from him in countless meetings, lawyers reviewing every detail of Maya's case. And in the end, the court had chosen what Maya herself had begged for. Until a permanent arrangement could be made, she would stay under Daniel's guardianship. It wasn't official adoption yet, but it was enough. On New Year's Eve, laughter replaced fear inside Daniel's modest apartment. Grace and Maya crouched beside the new Christmas tree he'd managed to scrape together money for, their small hands hanging ornaments with careful pride. The glow of lights bathed their faces, both children giggling when Max barreled through with a tinsel garland tangled around his tail. "Max, no!" Grace squealed, chasing after him. Maya laughed, a sound Daniel hadn't heard enough of, but one that cut deeper than any hymn. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching them. For years, the apartment had been quiet, filled only with Grace's steady voice and his own tired reassurances. Now it rang with joy, like it had been waiting all along for this moment. Maya turned, holding up an ornament shaped like a star. "Daddy, can you lift me?" Daniel froze for a beat, the word hitting him with the same quiet power it had in the subway. He smiled, walking over, scooping her up with ease. Of course. Together they placed the star on the highest branch. The girls clapped, Max barked, and for once the world outside didn't feel like a threat. It felt like possibility. Later that night, as midnight approached, the girls settled at the kitchen table with crayons spread across the surface. Daniel busied himself with hot chocolate, glancing over as the girls whispered conspiratorially, heads bent close. Finally, Grace hopped down and raced to the fridge. With a grin, she smoothed a fresh drawing against the door with a magnet. Daniel turned, and his breath caught. 2 stick-figure dads, 2 smiling daughters, and a scruffy dog with a wagging tail. Above them, the words in crayon, family. Maya looked up at him shyly. "We made it together." Daniel swallowed hard, blinking back tears. He walked over, resting a hand on each girl's shoulder. "It's perfect." The final minutes of the year ticked away. Outside, fireworks began to paint the sky, their colors reflecting faintly in the window. Inside, the small apartment glowed with warmth, the sound of children's laughter echoing like a promise. Once Daniel had thought Christmas meant nothing but survival. Now it meant rebirth, broken families stitched together by love becoming something new. And as the clock struck midnight, Daniel knew they weren't just surviving anymore. They were home.